Hello, everybody. Welcome to Soapbox. My name is Mauro DePasquale, Executive Director here at WCCA TV and your host for Soapbox. I want to thank you for joining us today. You're watching us on cable channel 194, or you can see us anywhere around the world at WCCATV.com. We're also available on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Wherever you are, we can be. Just tune in to us. We want to thank all our sponsors for making today's show possible, and we want to thank our volunteers and staff and all the work that goes on behind the scenes. I really want to get into today's show, though. I usually have a longer introduction for Soapbox, but today I'm going to cut it short because I want to introduce our guest, Cece Doucette. She's a technology safety educator from wirelesseducation.org, and also Patricia Burke, who's been here many times. She's an advocate for biological-based radio frequency limits, formerly HALTs, smart meters, and smart meters, and she's an advocate for your health and safety. So thank you guys for being here.
Thank you for having us.
So there's a lot to talk about because, you know, cell phones and all that, all the rest of it is everywhere today, without a doubt, and people are very comfortable with it. But we're not always, just like in the days of lead paint and lead gasoline and tobacco, you know, everything was okay to use at one point, and now we know otherwise when it comes to radio frequencies. Okay, so there's some new studies on wireless radiation. Can you share what we're learning?
Sure. About 10 years ago, the U.S. National Toxicology Program started a big study. It's a $25 million study, and they went in expecting to find that cell phones are safe. And in the spring of 2016, in the very first segment that they began to analyze, they found DNA damage, brain tumors, and heart tumors. And that study had its peer review this spring in 2018, and they voted to classify radio frequency radiation was a clear carcinogen, which means it causes cancer. And that came as quite a shock to a lot of people because all we hear is all Wi-Fi all the time without any information on the health risk. And some people will say, yeah, well, you need to have multiple studies saying the same thing. Well, right on the heels of the NTP study, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy found the same thing with the tumors and the DNA damage and additional biological effects. So we can't spin it anymore that there is no harm. We now have the scientific evidence. And in addition to brain and heart cancers and DNA damage, there are many, many other studies linking it to infertility, to cognitive impairment, to Alzheimer's, autism, a lot of the social and emotional issues that children and adults are facing now. We know that scientifically this radio frequency radiation hits the central nervous system especially hard, as well as the immune system. So if anybody is already experiencing some kind of a health issue, now you're layering this on top and it makes you even more vulnerable.
Right, right. Because we've heard people advocate, you know, when they've been at various public meetings and stuff, that, you know, they have just having their cell phone in the room, for example, or if their apartment is too close to where they keep, you know, the technology, that, you know, they have trouble sleeping, they get nervous, anxious feeling, they find it very difficult to focus.
Yeah.
So on top of that, you have the carcinogenic issue.
We do. And I know Patricia has done so much work with smart meters, and the industry would prefer to come in and upgrade their infrastructure by putting a smart water meter, gas meter, electric meter, solar inverter or solar meter right on your home that pulses microwave radiation 24/7. So at least with your cell phone, you have a choice. You can choose to put it in airplane mode and only take it out of airplane mode when you need to send and receive data. Otherwise, we're given all this technology with no safety information. And who would know that just putting it in airplane mode cuts off, for your cell phone, for example, you've got a cell antenna, a data antenna, a Bluetooth antenna, a Wi-Fi antenna, a locator antenna, and by now the industry appreciates us being their network with a hotspot. So without knowing it, we walk around with our devices constantly pulsing microwave radiation to make a handshake with the nearest cell tower or router, and nobody knows that. But if you look at the fine print that comes with every one of these devices, so for example, people who have an iPhone, you can go right into settings and then just scroll down a little bit to general. At the top, hit about, and all the way down, second from the bottom, you'll see legal. And if you look at that legal fine print disclaimer, it says RF exposure. That's radio frequency radiation or two-way microwave radiation that the industry politely calls energy. But what that fine print says is keep this device X amount of distance from your body, or you may exceed the FCC limits for public radiation exposure. And nobody knows that's there. And that limit was set back in the 90s to allow this much radiation. And today's science shows biological effect hundreds of thousands of times lower. So our FCC guidelines do not protect. And Dr. Martin Paul, he's a professor emeritus out at Washington State University. He just published a study on Wi-Fi, which is really important because he has taken all of the Wi-Fi studies that have been done and shown what the biological effects are and the stressors that they're causing to our system. So he has made that available for free online, so anybody can just go out and look for it. And
So anybody can read this? Is there a website for that? It is, right? The is that the elsevier.com? So www.elsvier.com. elsvier.com. And you'll find Martin Paul report from Wi-Fi is an important threat to public health.
Yes, and that same publishing house also has the Ramazzini Institute study out of Italy. And people can go there as well and look for that. And that also talks about the U.S. National Toxicology programs.
So now, how are these reports being, are they being countered by anybody, or?
The industry would prefer to downplay them. And in fact, when the first set of findings came out of the NTP study back in 2016, the scientists tried to tell the FCC, tried to tell the FDA, Federal Food and Drug Administration, which commissioned the study, and they tried to tell the public. But of course, there's a lot of conflict of interest with industry on this because their advertising dollars have a lot of say in what gets reported out in the media. So that should have been front page news all over the world, and there was barely a squeak. Now, is that report, is that when they test these, they're testing them on mammals, on animals, right? So are they getting, are they using basically the same frequencies that we would typically have around us, or is it something like more? No, in fact, what they did, so right now our FCC limits are set on a thermal effect, which basically says how much heat do you need from one device to raise the temperature of our biological system. So what they did is with these Sprague Dowley rats that they chose, they know that what happens to that particular rodent happens to humans typically in the end too. So they went in and they said, okay, at what level do we invoke that thermal effect? So where's the heat limit? And then they did the rest of the studies at the non-thermal, non-ionizing radiation level. So that proves, when they found cancer and DNA damage, that proves you don't have to have heat to have harm. And the FCC limits were only done on one device. And by the way, they put a spacer between the dummy head and the actual phone. So there's a big study out of France. It's being called PhoneGate. They actually went back and put the phone up against the head the way people really use it, and that exceeds the limit by 3 to 4 times.
Oh, geez.
So we're at a completely different place than we were when we started this conversation 2 years ago with you.
So the wireless industry, the cover stories there want you to know that they want you to believe that the cell phones are safe.
They do, because it would be a big financial hit to them. But just this spring, The Nation, which I learned is our country's oldest magazine, did this investigative report about how big wireless knew this risk existed back in the 90s. They were notified by their own scientists, and they did nothing to invoke the precautionary principle and protect the public. So anybody can go out to the internet and do a search on The Nation and their big wireless story. And Harvard actually did an even more in-depth investigation in 2015. And there's also a free report available through Harvard called Captured Agency, how the FCC is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates.
Yeah. Wow.
So, but again, you won't hear this in mainstream media
Right.
because of advertising conflicts, but it's all out there for anybody who wishes to investigate. And
Yeah.
that's why it's so wonderful that our independent cable stations will cover this issue, because it's so helpful.
Yeah, you're right. They're not buying ads here, so that's why I really believe in this kind of stuff. Community media, where it's not supposed to thrive on commercial dollars. It's here to provide a free speech platform and for stuff like this. So there are some resources. You have the nonprofit wireless education, wirelesseducation.org,
Yeah.
which you work with.
I do. I was so honored to volunteer my time. I'm a technical and professional writer by trade, and Dr. Deborah Davis, who's a Nobel Peace Prize laureate on climate change, has gotten passionately involved in this issue. And she referred me to somebody over in the UK who was building online courses to kind of synthesize all the science, because it can get very complicated. But the bottom line is, it's biologically hazardous. So we've taken the science, the international medical recommendations, because other countries are already informing their citizens about this. And we've distilled it into a half-hour course that anybody can take, literally less than the cost of a movie ticket. We want it very affordable, but we still have operating expenses to cover. But literally in a half an hour, anybody can go out to wirelesseducation.org, take this little course, talk to their family, have all the adults and the older kids in the family take it, and then you can level set, because this issue comes out of left field, and nobody even knows what that fine print in their own devices says.
Right. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that just don't want to believe it. It's like, it's
No.
so, it's so convenient, and, there's something about having, you have something that you're using all the time, and you become dependent on it. You don't want to know that it's,
Yeah.
potentially could kill you.
Yeah. But in addition to the biological effects, you just used a really important word, which is dependency, or
Yeah.
dependent on this. So now there's a whole nother body of scientific literature showing that this wireless radiation emission plus excessive screen time causes the same reaction in the brain as drugs, alcohol, tobacco, gambling, pornography. It's hitting the addiction centers of the brain. And we don't know it. We're just walking down this path, and everything's so fun and convenient. And before we know it, we have children who will blow a complete fuse if you try and take their devices away.
Right.
We have people who aren't sleeping at night anymore because our brain sees this constant microwave radiation as a light being on. And in the wee hours of darkness, our brain is meant to release melatonin to regulate our sleep cycle, and also to go in and clean up the toxins from the day. So now we're adding to the toxic load, and we're disabling the body's
stress.
That's right.
Yeah.
That is, it's oxidative stress.
So is any of this reversible?
Some, and we're all individuals. We have to approach it from where we are and get educated and do the best that we can within things that are within our control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they have found a couple of conditions, though, and one is the work with Peter on the autism spectrum, where they see a considerable improvement in the symptoms when they do sanitize the electromagnetic environment. And that's one of the reasons why having a smart meter opt-out policy, for the gas, water, and electric meters, it's really crucial, because if we find that the environment is contributing to illness and we continue to place that burden on our children, we're really robbing them of their lives.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And this conversation is really escalating right now.
Right. It's it's the electric company that wants to do the smart meters. And I remember when you were on before, there was a person that worked at the electric company that told me, you guys are absolutely, they couldn't speak, they had to be anonymous. But they told me it's absolutely correct about, the meters, especially where they put the meters like for apartment buildings and they put them all in one place.
It's heartbreaking.
This guy was very open about it.
Yeah.
It's really bad.
And the other issue with the meters, in addition to the radio frequencies, is that it pollutes the electric supply, the wiring in the home. And there was just a a large amount of testimony given in Arizona on the proceedings there. And they had, engineers showing measurements of this pulsing on the electric field. And there are people who've gotten so sick because the meter was behind the headboard of the bed. And, if you ask whether the meters are safe, what the states do is they measure the meter against the radio frequency guidelines from the FCC to say that it doesn't heat, your your body temperature.
Right.
So we have this very archaic system. And it really parallels the privacy too. I'm jumping a little bit, but the Supreme Court just had a ruling this week about privacy, saying that we can't continue to collect everyone's location from their cell phones. We have to have a warrant. People have a right to privacy.
Right.
And the smart meters really ran over that privacy issue as
Right.
well.
Yeah.
So even if people aren't really concerned about the radio frequencies and the health issues, there are lots of reasons to oppose the smart meters.
Right.
Yeah.
The security of the grid is also becoming a much larger conversation as you're putting the whole electric supply on the internet.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's funny because they have these standards, and it's like, well, it'll only kill you this much, and that's okay. You can make you can make profit on it. It's only going to kill you this much. We want. It's like they even just to accept a small amount of toxic. Something that's toxic this doesn't seem acceptable to me.
No, and it should not be imposed on a public that never consented to it.
Right.
But the first thing is to become educated,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
And then give people the right to know. Once
Right.
they have that right and they understand what the science is saying, then they have a choice. Do I choose convenience over health? And people will say, oh, we're all going to die anyway. But I would say to them, if you could speak to the parents that have called me up and said, my child's blood-brain barrier has been compromised, and now my child has these neurological issues that my doctors can't even figure out. And we know that radio frequency radiation opens the blood-brain barrier, which allows toxins to go into these sensitive tissues like the brain that have never been in there before. Or I had a gentleman call me from East Boston recently, and his father at age 54 was a salesman, so he was on his phone a lot and on the road a lot inside his metal box of a car, and metal amplifies radiation. And he wound up dying from one of those glioblastoma brain tumors. And for 2 years, from diagnosis to the 2 years when he died, his doctors didn't know about wireless radiation, so nobody cautioned him. And he was loved by his family, his friends, his clients. So everybody kept calling him to keep his spirits up. So what's he doing?
On a phone.
Sitting there on his phone with
Making
his
it
brain
worse.
tumor.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the public deserves a right to know. Our medical community needs to be trained. Our engineers need to be brought up to date on this.
Sometimes it's difficult for everybody to be up to date on everything in this
Yeah.
world. Of course, we know that, and that's where the government should step in. Are there any bills, public policies that need to be, call attention to?
Absolutely. Do you want to speak to Senator Moore's smart meter bill?
Well, yeah, Senator Moore
And I'll caution you, we only have a couple minutes. So,
Yeah,
okay.
sponsored a bill for the smart meter opt-out, and we're extremely grateful. The Worcester Info Team for Health is a group in Worcester that's continued to work on the smart meter issues, and they were all the radio frequency issues, and they were very pivotal in working with with Senator Moore on that bill.
Yeah, so that was great. And then we wound up with 8 bills this legislative session to give people the right to know and to ask our legislature to take action on this. Senator Karen Spilka's bill right now is with the Joint Committee on Rules. It's already been voted out favorably by the Joint Committee on Public Health, the Joint Committee on Education. They all examined this and said, yes, we need to keep this bill moving. And then a really
Well, did they
amazing-
kick it out of committee yet? Because it could
No,
stay in committee
it's-
forever,
no,
so we got to
they
get
have
them to get it
voted
out.
favorably.
Okay, good.
So
So-
it's moving
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the right direction, which
Yeah,
is
good,
phenomenal.
good, yeah.
And then a really amazing thing happened. Senator Julian Sear out of the Cape and the Islands used to be the Department of Public Health liaison to the State House. He introduced 2 bills. One, to give people the right to know what that fine print says, and 2, to protect children from handheld devices. When the Joint Committee on Consumer Protection heard testimony on those bills, they assigned a research analyst to this issue who dove in and did the research. And then the entire committee, the entire Consumer Protection Committee, wrote their own bill. And that's Senate Resolve 2431, and that's to get the right minds together at the state level. Let's investigate this and then decide what we're going to do to protect the public.
Right.
But we should not start another school year in September with our children being exposed to microwave radiation in the classroom. You can hardwire the technology. It's really easy to do.
Right, right.
And
And
then you
it's
have
even more
everything.
reliable in some way.
Yeah.
So, but we can also learn from other countries, right? Because other countries have
Absolutely.
banned this technology from their schools.
Yes.
So they must already know.
Yep. France in 2015 passed a national law prohibiting any
Right.
kind of wireless around preschool, nursery, the younger ages when that brain's going through rapid development. And then at the older ages, the Wi-Fi is only to be on when you absolutely need it, not just sitting there pulsing radiation
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
But just in December, the Mediterranean country of Cyprus, their medical community wrote an EMF declaration, electromagnetic field, and they put out a 16-point bulletin to give the public information on using technology but safely. And the Massachusetts Department of Public Health has told me that they've written a Wi-Fi fact sheet, a cell phone fact sheet, a cell tower fact sheet, and one for the high voltage power lines, because that's another really bad form of man-made energy.
Yeah.
So we are right on the cusp of getting this out to the public. But what the biggest lesson I've learned, Patricia, is that at every turn I expected that a public servant would take this and make it happen. But what I've discovered is the way our system works is the people have to use their voice to steer our public servants in the direction that they want them to go. So if everybody could reach out to your state senator and state rep and say, please support Senate Bill 2431 and Senate Bill 1268, then we would have that voice. And there are people this week making calls into the legislature.
All right. So this, and that's state legislation. So call your state reps, pass Senate Bill 2431 and 1268. And know this, that it's, the science is there, it's conclusive, it does cause damage. And final words before we sign off?
There's an excellent new film out too. I think it's going to hit the market on July 10th called Generation Zapped. And I know Worcester has had at least 1 or 2 screenings of it already.
And there's one at Worcester State in the fall planned as
good.
well by the
So,
Worcester Institute.
Yeah, and I encourage people to get together as a community or a family or with your friends, because if you're the only one talking about this,
Yeah.
it comes so far out of left field that it makes
Right.
you sound like,
Right, right. Oh,
don't
you're
tell me I
buying
can't
into
use it.
that. Yeah,
And the
right.
message is not no technology, it's safe technology.
Right.
Just learn to use it only when you need mobile on and hardwire everything else and turn
Right.
off your antennas.
Right. You don't need it all the time. I mean, I make the same mistake too. I'm carrying it in my pocket. You can feel the heat.
Yeah,
You know, oh, I got to shut this off. It's, you know, it can't be good.
it's not good.
Yeah.
It's not
But they got us. They get us addicted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much. We'll remind our audience, our viewers out there, wirelesseducation.org, wirelesseducation.org. Also look up, you can Google Understanding EMS, Understanding EMS, wirelesseducation.org.
EMF.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, electromagnetic field. So
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say
understand
S?
EMFs.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Understanding EMF. I must have been thinking something else. EMF. All right, you got it. Understanding EMF. Wirelesseducation.org. Cece Doucette and Patricia Burke joining us here today. Thank you so much. Any final words? About 5
I
seconds.
just want to thank all the people in Worcester who've played such an important part in Massachusetts in the conversation, because we were really at ground zero and it's still having an impact. And,
Yeah.
Yeah, and a shout out to Worcester Public Schools,
Yep.
because if you go out on their website and you look it up, you can find an RF exposure notification. They actually are telling people who are concerned about this ways that they can reduce their exposure.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Thank you, Superintendent. And, yeah, wonderful.
And John Monfrendo and
Yeah,
Brian McConnell.
John
Leslie
Monfredo, yeah,
Safford,
they're pushing it
and,
through. Diana Beach
Lance
area.
McKee
Yeah,
and Gail Pontius.
good for you
Great
guys.
work.
Thank you. I know you're watching. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much.
So keep in touch. I want to have you guys come back often.
Okay, we
All
would
right?
love to.
Keep hopefully sharing good news about those bills.
Maybe
Yes.
we'll get a show going again. at some
Yeah, oh, I'd love
We'll
that.
follow up.
Have you on it. You should do that. Until next time, I'm Mauro DePasquale. I want to thank you for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you on WCCA TV, the People's Channel.